Okay, multiculturalism, part one of several, for the famous IMON, which I may actually even put this on my website as well. What a good question. Now, normally I only operate at 0500 every morning until lunchtime, and then I stop thinking. But I just happened to realise it's crystallised in my head what to say to you. So, context for listeners. Imone has herself, and I would never identify her, and I hope she actually wouldn't identify me, although everybody knows me. Imone has a younger man of Arabic heritage, who, quite rightly, well, no, he made the biggest mistake of his life. He went to the wrong country. Britain's a problem, but anyway. At least they admit there's economic migration. Almost all migration, and I've fought and nearly died for human rights law. Almost all migration is economic, but let's keep to the point. So, what a good question. What do you think of multiculturalism? And do you know what? I'm going to answer very quickly with, this is going to sound like a tangent, but it's the opposite. Because all my adult life, aged 18, I left home, went to the other side of the world, bummed around for a year. Oh, no, I actually learnt to fly aeroplanes and did some productive stuff. And then I was based on the side of London, a very humble, then non-yuppie suburb called West Ealing. I didn't actually even really like London, but London was my base for 18 years and I did little jobs all over the world. Now, point being, in two ways, multiculturalism has been my whole life. My only child, 26-year-old, Estelle, named out of a Bob Dylan song, is half Polish, and that's before Poland was in the European Union, half English. But multiculturalism, now, if you read Time Out magazine 40 years ago, based in London, or as I was, I pop in occasionally, multiculturalism is all we heard about. Now, we know that the Blair Project was very multicultural, but multiculturalism is the silliest word in the world ever. There are two words, well, actually, there's a word missing. So, first of all, yes, racism. Now, I'm going to come back to racism in a minute. And in fact, I made a little film about immigration, which really is about racism. Okay, so you've got racism. But what the real question is what is multiculturalism? Now, Imone at her college will have been brainwashed that LGBTIQ plus whatever is a thing. Now, officially, according to the census of 2021 or 2, only 3.5% reported as not intending to be heterosexual. I can't remember exactly how the question was caged, but now, so let's just say roughly 3% of the population are 97% of the population in this country are heterosexual. Ooh, the audience is thinking, this is going to sound a bit bigoted. I'm just dealing with facts. Now, the truth is that most other cultures in the world, some cultures in Africa, you will get killed as a homosexual person of either persuasion. Iran, technically you can be killed by the state, etc., etc. Russia, a lot of Central Europe, non-heterosexualism. I'd just rather call it non-heterosexualism. You're in danger, and the same applies to some other cultures. Oh, that still sounds bigoted. What is multiculturalism? Well, multiculturalism is actually most cultures at the core of the culture. Now, I'm now putting the word in parenthesis. Take a lot of Indian culture from over the last 3,000 years. I can't remember when the Bhagavad Gita was written. I think it was about 2,500 years ago. A huge amount of any culture is instruction. Oh, no, it's not instruction. It's ethnic tribal ways. No, it's not. It's instruction as to how human females and males arrange their society, their behaviour, their future, their families, their sexual appetites, the whole thing. That's what a huge amount of culture is about. Now, sorry if you ask me, most religions are about oppressing the female in one way or another. Even Buddhism. Buddhism does not, no, I should say even Buddhism. Buddhism's one of the worst. Under a cover of, oh, everybody's one. There is no human, there is only oneness, universal consciousness, etc., which has been turned into conscious agent theory by people like Donald Fagan. No, is it Donald Fagan? It might be. Yeah, just look up conscious agent theory. Okay. Buddhism. Women aren't allowed to hold priestly roles. So you see, the reality is that culture. Oh, how can you say that? What about the tribal dances of Guatemala, of Easter Island, of even China, of so much of now let's go on to politically correct terms now. So much of a people, because I only recognise the word people. A people is a people who identify as a group. That can be the people of this awful island, or it could be the people of Poland, who they're very, very nationalistic. The people of America, which is slightly more complicated, because that's where we can get into conversations of multiculturalism. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to miss my most important point, which is a terribly positive point. But anyway, what is multiculturalism? Largely, if you look at many of the heritages, now that's the politically correct word, a person of this heritage, a person of that heritage, a person of that heritage, then we subdivide that into multiculturalism correctly. It doesn't really mean different nations. I have a English friend who's South African by birth. He married a very English, slightly repressed, probably ex-public school woman, and she fell in love with him, I guess. I assume that's what happened. He was a Mormon. In South Africa, you're almost required to have a religion because your business is done via church colleagues. You will find your mating partner. No, you will find your sexual partner when you're a kid. If you can't find one at school, you might find one at a church. You will often find your life partner to breed with at the church. Perhaps I need to just slightly emphasize why I was talking about homosexuality and heterosexuality. Almost all the cultures in the world, or I'd say probably 90% of the cultures of the world, I'm not sure actually how India is, and I'm pretty sure that China is pretty negative about homosexuality. What I'm really saying is almost all the cultural groupings of the world, their life is about heterosexual breeding, eventually. So you cannot divorce culture from heterosexual breeding. Well, I don't think you can have homosexual breeding. Sorry, I've rather lost track. Reversing back into what I was about to touch on a moment ago. My friend from South Africa, now, he married an English woman. Now, I can't remember, I don't know if it was him. I think it probably was him. His family in South Africa were pretty devout Mormons. He ends up with an English woman. She's had to adopt his very strict culture. Now, to me, culture is just a set of behaviours that any group, obviously it has to be a rather large group, you can't include the ferret breeders of Workington Salop as a specific culture. Culture is just a reasonably large group. The dreadful Herefordshire has got Mennonites, which are the same as Amish, except the women are treated even more fucking disgustingly and made to wear nurses' smocks with stupid blue hats. You have Many Jehovah's Witnesses, Herefordshire is a centre of Jehovah's Witnesses. Those kinds of behaviours, religions, they have such a massive effect on how somebody arranges their life. I think you have to call them almost a different culture. So, Britain is a country with with quite a few different cultures, and that's irrespective of where they're born or the colour of their skin. But anyway, so what does multicultural mean? Right, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now, I'm slightly assuming that Imone is asking this for she's curious, thinking through her present and future with her chap. There's one most important thing in the world. You see, everybody, unfortunately, multiculturalism, which is just about culture, which really is largely about how we arrange human breeding. Oh, that's heresy. I'm sure you'll find almost all the so-called cultural practices of somewhere like India are deep down often the dances, the myths, the traditions, even the art is largely linked into the behaviours of the different sexes. And largely, that's always, how does the male sex, I mean, I'm an expert in evolutionary biology, I'm allowed to use the really rude words, I mean, which of course are scientific. How does the male of the species reduce the likelihood that the female of the species is going to get impregnated by 10 different blokes in the same day? There is what's known as the theory of willy size. This is a real thing. Gorillas have very small willies relative to their body weight. Bonobos have very big willies relative to their body weight. Human beings are about halfway along that scale. Body weight to size of member. Any biologist will tell you that gorillas largely pair bond and are pretty faithful. Bonobos, on the other hand, if it doesn't move, they'll shag it. If it does, they'll shag. What's the jokey word? If it moves, if it doesn't move, they'll shag it till it does. I think that's the jokey line. Is it? If it doesn't move, if it moves, shag it. If it moves, shag it. If it doesn't, shag it till it does. Yeah, that's bonobo's life. Now, the male gorilla only needs a small penis to stick his penis in and spread a little bit of sperm. Because evolutionists designed the gorilla, there's no particular reason, it's almost random, such that the behaviour of the gorilla is they do not take on multiple sexual partners. On the other hand, Mrs. Bonobo, little Naomi Bonobo, she's strutting along to Lidl, doing her stuff, with her short skirt on, and she could have had 20 different sexual partners that day. So, the one with the biggest dick gets his sperm in further. That's actually literally a proper biological theory of animal behaviour, primate behaviour. Human beings are about halfway down the scale. Size of dick, except for mine, which is, of course, absolutely ginormous, in relation to their body weight. So, in other words, the human female may not necessarily be against having a fag and a little bit of how'd you father around the back of Lidl while Mr. Bonobo is there doing the shopping or loading it into the car. So, that's why we have, you can counteract this, please. If anyone's ever going to get married to me, no, you're not bloody touching anybody else. Right. You could, other ways of culture can actually counteract natural behaviours. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because I actually am quite an old-fashioned person. Old school. Oh, is that the moon coming up? Yes, cultural, they're called memes, can actually override biological behaviours, or some of them. I could give a list of examples. Right, I'm going to try and keep to the point now. But a lot of Western culture especially, I'm not that much of an expert of Indian cultures. I understand Arab cultures, actually. Well, we can call it Islam, but it's just Arab. Okay? And a lot of I understand Islam. I don't approve of it. I could not conceivably approve of any culture which is stuck in the Stone Age, because they didn't reform the Quran, which at least they have reformed the Bible a bit 300 or 400 years ago, but they didn't reform the Quran. And any culture or religion or whatever you want to call it that basically rates the worth of a woman as half that as a man, one man equals two women in Islamic law, more or less. To me, that's the Stone Age and should have been consigned to the Stone Age centuries ago. But let's keep it to the point. Most of these Western religions, I don't know about South American ones, I should say. There will be some African ones which are a bit different. But their culture is actually we can use this horrible, silly word, religious. The metaphysical practices that arrange society to reduce the likelihood the female's off shagging too much. And the bloke, therefore, it's even most of the gods, not all the gods, but the gods are generally a male figure. That male figure is, I'm providing. You don't need to go off and have a quickie round the back of the mud hut with, the other one that lives in the camp. Right, and this sounds trite, but that's what is multiculturalism? Multiculturalism is merely different peoples with different heritages have different behaviours that they've developed as traditions over time. Mainly, they are in respect of the breeding habits of Homo sapiens. Now, I hope this question is asked, well, as any man, I shouldn't really hope that any woman's going to get pregnant to somebody else. I'm putting that as a joke. But if this were like, should I be breeding with somebody from a different cultural background, there is a problem. No, I'm just doing that for suspense. There's a thing that's a fantastic benefit. Oh, no one's ever said this before. Because they don't. Because we are so lost to Nigel fucking Faragean utter evil ignorance. Nobody says the good things. Sorry, we should have as many Islamics here as possible, as long as they keep up with the not drinking. Drinking harms far more people. In Pastiland, thousands and thousands of families destroyed by drink. Ditto Herefordshire, probably slightly worse. Wales, it's a disaster. So any culture that has a habit of not really drinking very much, as most Islamics, although I've known plenty who are total fucking hypocrites. We used to know my family worked for Saudi super rich, and their agent would come to London in the late 70s. His name was Kamal, friend of one of the sheikhs. And as soon as he got off the plane in London, right, Johnny Walker and whores, continually. And almost all of them, that's their behaviour. So you see, what is their culture? In that instance, what was Kamal's culture? Who gave me an expensive watch, to suck up to his England man, he gives the son a, but don't tell anybody about the whores and Johnny Walker. I'm not judgmental. That's just a fact. What is their culture? I'm not even sure you really can say, but I'm going to try and keep to the point. Please note, it's a good example. Kamal couldn't go whoring in Saudi Arabia with their mad Wahhabis. Right, so there is a massive benefit in multiculturalism, particularly within the same household. All we are really talking about when we're talking about multiculturalism, of course, what we're talking about is we don't want any more Enoch Powells, and we don't want people to be hurt. People would be hurt in Britain last century. But we're talking about that, but what we're talking about much more is the breeding habits of different groups of people who live in the same geographical region, which we call a country. This is all copyright me, by the way, and totally original. This is just crystallized in my mind because I love Imone. She thrills me. Anyway, even more than somebody else, probably, who, well, no, that's real love, but she'll never talk to me again. She's from a different culture. Anyway, we were asking the question, do you approve, or what do you think of multiculturalism? What we're talking about is a geographical area called a country. That could be a massive country like America, or a small country like Moldova, which is a magnificent mix of cultures over the centuries. Britain tends to be more of a what's the word, for a culture that hasn't really mixed with other peoples from the world. And I'm sorry, Wales and Cornwall are not different cultures deep down. They're pretty similar. In a household, which is all that really matters, what matters in people's lives? So I'm asked a question by Imone. Okay? So that question, what do you think of multiculturalism? Well, life is as follows. Life is what happens in your household, which could be in your student digs, but much more of your life is going to be in a household. And if you don't live with somebody of the opposite sex, or if you're in the 3%, same sex, you're mad because it's so much cheaper. It's better for you. Now, what are households? The majority of the things that go on in households is breeding. So, if you have two different households, two different cultures in a household, that's brilliant. Nobody says this. Nigel Farage and his band of ignorant fucking skinhead thugs who do come on holiday to places like the south coast of Fort Cornwall. I've met a few of them. Okay? They won't tell you this. A child, the offspring from two different cultures, especially if they have two different mother tongues, has got a massive benefit, because that actually enhances their IQ, their intelligence, their whatever you want to put it, their outlook on the world. In other words, half-breeding, getting rid of individual cultures, is the most magnificent thing of all. It is, any parent who is a bit sophisticated will say, yes, children who are brought up in two languages fluently, the way their mind, the structures of their brain is actually improved. It's well known. So, this thing called multiculturalism, which really is about, well, of course, not that many people from different cultures end up in the same house and breeding. Oh, it's common enough. I did it myself. Okay? You'll meet plenty of chocolates in London. But it's still going to be, I don't know, is it a 30% thing? It's probably not even 50%. So, that's the massive benefit of multiculturalism in a household. Multiculturalism at work, in politics, in business, which is a lot of the rest of our life. Not me. I've always been the most pure multicultural person. I mainly worked abroad, actually. Okay, that's much, much harder, because, in fact, it hurts the person in any national area. There is basically one culture which predominates, and they may be irrespective of colour. I mean, America's a bit different because they've had so many immigrants, so they arrange their politics a bit differently. But I don't know about Australia. But most countries, their law, which defines how you behave at work, in business, etc., is arranged around the feelings of the predominant, in the West, that will be the white cultures. No, my own daughter works to save abused brown women. We do not accept your fucking female genital mutilation. We understand you're not doing it to be pernicious, malicious, deliberately cruel, but sorry, it is an absurd anachronism of human evolution that groups of people have decided to cause extremely painful, dangerous wounds to the genitalia of one of the sexes. There are some arguments that applies to willies when it comes to no, of course you're not allowed to say Jewish people chopping off the foreskin, and this, I think it's a completely fallacious argument that it's more hygienic. Anyway, but let's keep to that simple one. That's quite a good example, that. Of course, there are extremes in different cultural practices. So, but as I said, because this is the most important thing, all I've heard for 40 years is multiculturalism. Well, it's now accepted that it didn't work. I'm going to try and get on to the more important bit in a minute, because there is a more important bit of this. But cultures, I've related them to households. That's what matters in people's lives. I sometimes do legal advice to people. I've given up. But you will find families where there have been 20 or 30 year feuds. In Wales, in Cornwall, I know a lady, over the land. Who owns the land? Who's going to inherit it? Who, and these are cultures. Now that work through individual households, and so often the individual households end up at war with each other because the culture of this place has legal arrangements around this horrible thing called money. But that's a huge part of what our culture is. The politics within a household as to who's going to end up with more of the dosh. There will be different arrangements in cultures, households, which follow Islamic law. There are different arrangements in America, because they have a very, very fundamental tweak in their legal system, which is different to ours, which is if somebody was arrested or whatever for an act against a person, we could talk about O.J. Simpson, for example, although that's an extreme situation because this is very serious. Let's say a better situation would be if you had a priest in your family who was arrested for there's very little proof ever, really. There's no CCTV, or there might be these days, but alleged sexual abuse of a minor. Now, we all know it happens. I'm not disagreeing with that in the slightest. And that criminal offence against the person, the authorities decide they haven't got enough evidence to prosecute it. The victim can still take out a civil case for $50 million damages, and they almost always do. Now, this is different to Britain. You can actually technically take civil cases based on criminal matters in Britain, but it's done nothing like as much. So why am I going off to this seeming tangent? Because that one fundamental thing, as soon as somebody we've just had last week, I should say, the record miscarriage of justice. A man who's been in jail, I think it's 37 years for a murder he didn't commit, and it's conclusive. In America, as soon as somebody gets arrested for something, loads of people crawl out of the woodwork. Some whatever. You saw this with Jay-Z. I'd be surprised if Jay-Z committed genuine criminal acts. A woman who made an allegation against Jay-Z, that woman's father then went into the public domain shortly afterwards and said, there is no way my daughter, who was 17 at the time, could conceivably have been at the party where it is she alleged Jay-Z raped her, because I drove her to somewhere else 50 miles away. Now, as soon as that thing came out about Jay-Z, there will be other people who've put in civil lawsuits against Jay-Z straight away for millions. It's happened. And more than half of them will be absolute disgusting liars, because the worst thing you can do to another human being ever is make a false allegation of criminal behaviour, which people do all the time. Why do I bring this in? Because this legal difference affects American families much more than it does Britain families. Because if there's any minor criminal matter going on, let's say that priest, maybe he's got a wife, maybe he's got other relatives who may be inheriting some of the family money. They know as soon as he gets a criminal case against him, he could well end up having a $10 million lawsuit against him as well. That's the important thing. That doesn't happen in Britain. So you have a different set of behaviours that happen to protect their money. They'll go to any ends to protect their money, and that may include immediately divorcing him and getting a settlement before he gets sued for 10 million quid later, if you're his wife. The culture, the behaviour between people within households can be considerably different between different cultures. Now, so unfortunately, the absolute dumbed down crap that this country is, that is also ruining poor Imone in her college, is so thick that it's never actually even spoken about those things. I bet you I'm one of the first people who's ever done this. And what they talk about multiculturalism is films, stuff you might see at a museum, etc., etc. That is such an irrelevant part of culture. Culture is behaviour in the household and behaviour at work, the rules that define you at work, how you behave at work. In this culture in Britain, we now have a false allegation culture. So mid-ranking employees, never mind business owners, are constantly terrified of getting lawsuits against them. That's a culture. In Europe, this does not happen. So they have a different culture within their households. In America, it happens even worse, more often than not with guns at some point. And that does actually happen. So what is a culture? It's not this, oh, let's go to the British Museum and celebrate all cultures. That's just a show-off fringe thing that doesn't really affect people. Now, I mentioned a magnificently positive thing about young people if they have parents from different cultures, particularly if they have parents from different languages. Now, we've got some negatives coming up there, I'm afraid. If you look at the wonderful Horizon programme called Why Did I Go Mad? You can find it on dailymotion.com. Why Did I Go Mad? Within there, at last, 30 years ago, I knew that this was true, but things like particularly schizophrenia, which was a term we shouldn't use anymore. There's a wonderful doctor in there. I think he's a Dr. Singh, actually. Now, he's really awful. He should actually be drowned, not because he's black or anything, but because he says, oh, right, well, I admit that there is a 10% genetic element to what we call schizophrenia. What he should have actually said is this has all been of the worst white elephant in the world ever, that genetics affect mental illness. And there's a small input from your genes, but the great majority of serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, comes from your parents' behaviour. Full stop. The behaviour in your household. But then there's an even tougher thing, which is those who are displaced people, and he gives the example not of West Indians living in London, but actually the highest rates of schizophrenia are among the displaced Greenlanders. So they're very white. That's in Denmark, isn't it, I think? Now, small problem. So, if you have two different cultures in a child's upbringing, in a way, even if both of them have lived in the country for years, almost certainly one of them will be an immigrant, you actually do have that partial risk factor. Because one of them, a person in that family, is a displaced person. And no matter how loving and brilliant the partnership is, nevertheless, there is that element of a displaced person in that household which can be passed on via stress, behaviour, anxiety, cortisol levels, etc., in that household. So that's a biochemical reason why multiculturalism isn't quite just a wonderful thing. Now, to me, though, being positive, the language thing is so good for children's minds. Plus, as long as there isn't too much negativity or just angst is the word I use, from there being confusion via an element of displacement in the household, there are obviously positive other things, not just language. If a child has two different people of two different mindsets, because even if you've left Islam, if you're born into that mindset, a larger part of it is going to stay with you in one way or another. And actually, I hate even talk about Islam because Islam's a total chimera. A chimera is an illusion. The thing that really matters about Arab countries, and I've lived in them, plenty of them, is the absolute consumerism. 97% of Arab families, be they in Palestine, Jeddah, Tehran, or Mogadishu as part of Boko Haram, they want the expensive sofa in their lounge where they entertain their spiritual nonsense mumbo-jumbo mates. They're very materialistic cultures. Sometimes I think they're actually more materialistic than white Western heathen, so-called secular peoples. Briefly, because this is really part 2, intro to part 2. If we're talking about people from different mindsets, different culture, that's what a culture is. That's all a culture is. You've just got a different mindset. You've got a different set of little internal rules you learned as a kid in your household. It's so hard. I've had a multicultural marriage for a few years that then became... Right, I made the great big mistake thinking that people from Central Europe would have the same value system as some of the people here. I was part of the mentality here, the mindset, which is less is more. Consumerism is bad. Try and be a bit more collaborative, a bit more cooperative. I thought Central Europeans might have those attitudes. No, they didn't. Central Europeans, 98% of them are desperately were then just wanting to catch up with us. They saw on their televisions, we have stuff. They didn't have stuff. So deep down, brutally desperate to get this lifestyle standard of living. And my poor ex-wife from a different culture, I thought she kind of understood this, because I lived in a very humble little cottage in the countryside with not many possessions, really. But no, of course she hated it, because her culture is at a different time and place. Up until the 70s, they had nothing. Stalin made sure of that. And then from the early 80s, 90s, it was about, we want the lifestyle that we can see on the Western television, and some of which they saw. But then there are other things, which is attitudes towards openness regarding psychology. About Central European families in general do not open up about A, their psychological or emotional problems, B, problems with their family. Now, of course, I didn't know that. I had no idea. That causes great friction. If you've got one part of the equation in a household, me, I'm like from the generation where, thankfully, in my opinion, this culture is probably better, although it's gone too far, of trying to be open up about our depression, about our weird sexual feelings and all stuff like that. Whereas generally speaking, Central Europe is like, oh, no, we don't put that stuff out in the public. And if anybody hears about our problems in our family, that's a threat. So there you have a real stress point and angst. But then you have also cultures to communicate is so complex, particularly English. English is the hardest language in the world because many words actually differ between the classes, between the jobs you do, between the kind of television you watch, whether or not you do sport. I don't ever have anything to do with sport. If most Englishmen, I'm sure, speak with reference to football or some other kind of sport, I wouldn't know what they were talking about. That's a bit of a trite example, but there are plenty of words. I mean, the best example is the word for the midday meal or the 1 o'clock meal. The working class often use the word dinner. Middle classes and up use the word lunch. That is a completely culturally dependent use of a word. You will never hear an aristocrat speak about wanting to have dinner at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But there are many other words which actually are subtly also class dependent. Blah, blah, blah. And I'll just leave it with a hilarious example. Why is English the hardest language in the world? Because I don't even know. I mean, I'm making this for Imone. I don't even know if what she would understand as a term of endearment. I think she'd probably be in parallel with me. But I was one day I was doing some tidying up in the house when my Polish of kind of above average educational level, which in Poland is shit anyway. They pretend otherwise, but it is. But total fair-minded, good soul-hearted person, or good enough. So one day I was doing something and I was just like, this is nearly 30 years ago. The usage of the word I'm about to use has probably changed in the meantime, as has the culture. But I just said, you trollop. Okay? Now, at that time, in my class, which is sort of reasonably well-educated, poor, shabby middle class, that was a term of endearment. One wouldn't have in the slightest for a second meant you are a prostitute. It was a term of endearment. It's actually a really lovely word, I think. There's another word simpler. Strumpet. You're a bit of a strumpet, you are. You're a trollop, you are. Okay? It was just a term of endearment. Maybe she hadn't done her hair or whatever. And she says, what does that word mean? And it's like, I was forced to get the dictionary out. And when she actually saw the dictionary definition, she went berserk, and she really did take it to heart. I could not convince her. This is a loving use of the language. I wouldn't, if I had a friend who was just a friend woman, I wouldn't call her a trollop. My love, the person I've dedicated my life to, I'm calling her a trollop. It was categorically acceptable then term of endearment. It probably is not quite so acceptable now, as we've had 15 years of political correctness. My point between that is that this notion of multiculturalism, I am totally for it. It deepens and broadens the mind. It enhances intelligence and learning. I've learned other cultures have different attitudes. I've had several lovers from different cultures, several Americans, and American culture is very different about several things. It deepens. To me, the most important words in the English language after relative are, it deepens the mind, it deepens the thinking, it widens your knowledge. But does that really do any good? I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'm speaking in philosophical terms. Does that actually do any good? Even to me, the individual. So what if I've got a deeper and wider perspective? Does that actually help me in my life? Most people don't have the depth and perspective I have. So all it does is make me different to them. And of course, one is never thought of well if other people think, you think you're better than us. So, ultimately, the answer to the question, what do I think about multiculturalism? At the level of different languages for children in a household, even different cultural behaviours. It's very good for intellect, for understanding the world. There are some negative frictions. It creates confusion in a child's mind, which can have negative implications. It's largely an illusion, this idea of multiculturalism, because in any society, the legal work, money arrangements of the majority indigenous people, in other words, whitey in Britain, they dominate fully. Of course, usefully, Britain has changed a bit in the last 20 years. It's absolutely accepted that one must accommodate the belief systems or different cultural setting within of other peoples, and that's great. That's absolutely great. But it doesn't make much difference. I suppose, what can you say? Can we put a number on it? I mean, funnily enough, I referred to in my writing today the film Beautiful Laundrette, My Beautiful Laundrette. That was the author's gone mad. He's horrible nowadays. He fortunately went to his head. I've followed his career all my life. But that aside, that was, to me, about the best multicultural event ever. Before I saw that, we're a bit sick of films about gays, frankly. There have been far more films and media with gays in them than proportionate to the amount in society. But I didn't know anything about Pakistanis. And that film had a Pakistani man in who was also gay. And it was so brilliantly made, the film, that it was a film about we mustn't consider the Pakistani or the gay man other. They're equally valid, beautiful human beings. It's a magnificent film. Truly magnificent. So, essentially, prior to that period roughly, which was the late 70s, early 80s, other cultures were even more divided and hateful. Because if you don't know anything about another culture, you suspect them, and that can bubble over into hate. It's a very good film about that. And there are others as well. So, yes, mixing of the cultures living with each other, living in each other's households, without a doubt, has a fundamental positive thing at the personal level with your lover, your neighbour, and of course, if you realise that somebody from a different culture is an equally valid human being, you generally respect them better at work or if you're having financial arrangements with somebody or etc. The problem is, though, it's been turned around into something in a way that it isn't really. It's been oversold. What do I think of multiculturalism? Things just are. And when you get older, you realise that real change takes a lot longer than people think. Multiculturalism, although we don't really have multiculturalism other than some of us have bred with people from different cultures. That has a lifelong effect. I mean, it's a well-known fact that multicultural relationships and marriages are some of the shortest lived on average. It's fucking hard. It's really hard to stay with somebody all your life from a different culture. It's much easier to stay married with somebody from the same culture. That's what the data says. And I'm a silly utopian dreamer. I always am thinking it should be otherwise. I would hope it's otherwise. But that's what the data says. It also says lesbians, on average 6 years together after marriage. Homosexuals on average 7 years after, men that is. And heterosexuals, I can't remember the number for heterosexuals, but it's longer. So, because lesbian, gay man, homosexual, I've lost track of how we're meant to describe it. They're essentially a cultural behaviour. They're a culture. Blah, blah, blah. I hope you followed that. I can promise you one thing, because I've been looking for communicators. I've listened to people speaking. I lived in a place nearby 30 years ago where all the great minds gathered to talk about their books. A literary festival, the biggest in the world. Okay? And I've never heard anybody speak about this issue sanely and in a full, broad, but correct manner. There you go. That's for Imone, because she deserves it, because she makes me laugh. Yeah, this is for Imone. Might not sound like it, but I'm a continual psychologist for 30 years. For money, although I don't, my ideal life is to do this 1/3 of my waking hours. For money, I look after, my favourite job, I'm doing one at the moment, is 5 acres of land that's owned by a woman, totally dysfunctional family over 2 generations. She's been in a bit of a mess, but she's all right actually. The land is totally overgrown. We're talking literal jungle. So, naked or just wearing my shorts on nice days, I'm there with my scythe, and I'm not joking, this is what I actually do, or one of the 3 things I do, the main one writing. So I literally am hacking away at the overgrowth and reorganising it and saving wood for burning later, etc, etc. But I hate it. I love the work. I hate it because every single person, this one's all right, but I've done this about 20 times in the last 10 years, 20 years actually. No, I've done it about 30 times. Every single person has got psychological problems, and I have to deal with their psychological problems. Narcissistic personality disorders, all kinds of, and they're all in a mess. Most of them can't sleep, etc. Why did I turn this on? Oh yes, from this woman who's born and bred an ex-farmer, tough. I've learnt some words, wonderful words, Cornish words actually. Frankly, I didn't know. Up until now, you are the only person in Cornwall I've kind of enjoyed. Born and bred, I mean. Oh, I've met a few others who are all right, and I knew some 20, 15, 20 years ago. So I've learnt from her hell up and run word, but the best one is gibber. Gibber is somebody who, using charm, makes false promises that are important, i.e. promises of work, promises of money for a deal, etc., and then they welsh on the deal. So, the most important commodity in the world, dear Imone, is time. So I shall be saying to myself, if Naomi, even if Imone ever says she's going to do something and then doesn't, well, she's bloody gibbering me. Okay? Anyway, I'm going to do a little bit more, but I'm deadly serious actually, because if you're going to, this is a daddy talk. If you're going to do nutcracker therapy, which the world needs, I'm serious, I'm not joking. I don't gibber anybody, okay? If you're going to do it, to do anything slightly outside the box which is the confined Leon world, in anything, be it on the land, be it with animals, be it with psychology, it takes 3 times more time than normal life, because you're coming up endlessly against having to deal with the resistance of people who don't trust you or want to undermine you, etc. So time, and this has been my life for 25 years, endless fucking wasting my time of people, mainly women, who've all got personality problems. They're all middle class. I only deal with people who've read books, which means you're middle class, by the way. No matter what. Yeah, middle class means people who've read books, good books. They all charm, smarm. Oh yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to actually even end up making a film about that. Then it never happens. Gibber. Okay, and it wastes your time. I've recently had, essentially over 6 months, a huge amount of my time wasted by various women. But now I have the right word, and I love it, because the words are important. They're gibbering me. They're gibber, right? So I'm telling you that because that's daddy talk. I don't mind if you gibber me because you make me laugh. But that is the number one issue. I've reformed major law in Britain. But then after that, I had loads of gibbering from fellow campaigners, fellow battlers. No, they were all gibbering. They were gibbers. Okay? That's what you're up against in life, no matter what you think. I'm going to do part 2 of multiculturalism today or tomorrow. But listen, the stuff that, at a personal level, in fact, your psychological work, okay? Sorry, society's approach to people from, or different peoples living in the same space, which is the correct way of talking about immigration, multiculturalism, anything in that area. It's got, irrespective of skin color, whatever. Psychology's approach to dealing with different peoples sharing the same space is so fundamental to present and future psychology. I'm sure you even do modules on it now. It will all be crap. It will all be infantile PC crap. My Willie has been in more people from women who I've really liked, often loved, from different cultures than anyone else you'll meet in Pastiland, okay? But that's not a brag, that's just been my life. And actually it's not very happy, because if you have a relationship with somebody 3,000 miles away and you're only there for 6 months, it's a disaster, okay? Real culture is what real people are like privately. That's what real culture is. I know a lot about different cultures mixing. It's always difficult in once we've moved beyond the smiles phase. Anyway, truly, I'd suggest you even begin. If you want to actually become famous Nutcracker Naomi, you forget pricks like Tate, okay? And you've got to have 5 books on the go at the same time. That's what I do. I've got actually 7 books that they're in my mind as I'm doing the kind of job I'm doing. And here's one to write that I'm not going to do, but you should do, okay? But you need to have your life completely organized. You've got a notepad for that book, a notepad for that book, okay? But here's an idea for an actual book if you're shagging somebody from a different culture, okay? And hopefully you've also done that in the past, okay? What are the real issues for psychology of peoples from different regions sharing the same space? Bed, house, work, economy, money, etc. It's a really interesting subject, and I bet you because of political correctness and absolute bullshit from creeps like Leon, who should be drowned, and without even knowing anything about him, I know he should be drowned. I'm a pacifist, so I'm joking, but he should never go anywhere near a student. Okay, there's a really interesting book there because that's the reality, okay, of psychology. We do have 5, 6, 7 million immigrants from over the last 20 years that have come in. It is a terribly complicated matter, those cultures sort of combining, okay, after the smiles have gone. A lot of East Europeans, for example, now have caught up on, if they make false allegations, they can destroy somebody and end up with their ex-partner's money, stuff like that. It's now becoming quite common. I can give you examples. So that's causing a huge stress within society. Those people will end up on your psychiatrist's or your therapy couch, etc. So it's a really good idea for a book for you, but you've got to fucking get your act together and have 5, 6, 7 notepads. Phones are no good, batteries not working, whatever, on different subjects. But there's a good book in that. And if you want to deal with me, okay, you can be starting to write this, which then gets also turned into a podcast, which gets turned into something else, which gets turned into something else. I did tell you, you probably won't have bothered listening or writing it down. Don't worry, that's a friendly. Okay. If you want to know about the problems of Islam, look up Yasmin Mohammed's talks. They're magnificent. Listen to every word I've sent you. I sent you to this 1-hour video on immigration I made. You can spread it if you want, please. Okay. It's very pro-brown people. And the thing I sent you yesterday. Get your head into it. Deal with it properly. Okay, bye for now. We do need to meet soon. I've just made a little bit of money, so I am liberated. Although we need to meet very, very soon.